Good afternoon and welcome to the latest installment of Power Huddle, Inside the Minds of ESG Gurus. I am Heidi Friedman, a partner and co-chair of our firm's ESG Collaborative. During this monthly series, I chat one-on-one with innovative ESG execs. These are unscripted discussions that are going to examine how these execs from various industries are actively paving the way as ESG trendsetters and championing pragmatic ESG strategies that align with business values while building a sustainability framework to advance their company's ESG's goals and practices. I am so excited today because joining me is Isabel Fields, ESG Coordinator for Hearst. She is passionate about fostering positive transformations in corporate settings and currently contributes to Hearst ESG team. Her responsibilities encompass leading various initiatives, including Neurodiversity at Hearst. I can't wait to talk about that, which aims to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts by embracing cognitive diversity in both recruitment and management practices. Additionally, Isabel oversees projects relating to web accessibility, sustainability management, and ESG reporting. So I'm very thankful to my oldest child for connecting us, Isabel. And I'm most excited because we've typically talked to women who are 20 or 30 years into their career. They may or may not be new to CSR or sustainability, but you are slightly new to the professional work field. And I want to hear all about why you chose this and what you're doing, because it's really an inspiration and I really want to, in this growing field. And so I'm so excited to have your sort of fresh air to bring this back to life for us. So before we get forward, just a few little housekeeping items. So this program is being recorded. You will be able to review it on our Thompson Hine YouTube channel. It'll also be released as a podcast associated with the Thompson Hine Laws podcast. This presentation is intended for the general information of individuals and organizations on matters of current interest. The thoughts and opinions being expressed today are those of the individual panel members only and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of our clients, employers, affiliates, or Thompson Hine. The content should not be taken as advice, as the views expressed are for informational purposes only. If you have questions or comments, though, we encourage you to participate. Please put the chat to my name, Heidi Friedman, and I will do my best to get your question to Isabel within our 30-minute time frame that we have together. So let's get started. Isabel, I love that you chose ESG as a career. I'm so excited. Tell us a little bit about your ESG journey and just sort of your early commitment to corporate sustainable responsibility.
Yeah, happy to. And thank you so much for having me. I think my career started, from my first internship and learning what I didn't want to do. So my first internship was at Human Rights Watch, and I thought it was going to be like my dream internship. I was like, this is what I want to do. I was going to do development there, and I hated it. I was like, actually, I don't want to do this. And I was seeing kind of this like natural push towards CSR, ESG, however you want to frame it. And this interesting time where nonprofits and corporations were collaborating in ways we hadn't really seen. Obviously evolved much more since then. And I, at that time, was like, I want to be a part of that. And so really just started to think about it, focus on it, read about it, and try to get every job I could. And now it's kind of my entire career has really been focused on the efforts, and have been at Hearst for about a year and a half now.
Yeah. And I love that. It's a good reminder too, because, corporate sustainability is not a new thing. I mean, the whole ESG umbrella is some new terminology and things like that. And stakeholder demand is up. But overall, I mean, I've been doing sustainability for 30 years. So it's interesting because you've been at the height of this emergence. And there's also like 450 ESG certificates and courses out there. I actually did do one online with Berkeley. Tell me a little bit. I don't think you've done that, and I think you've learned on the job, and I'm so impressed with your knowledge. So tell me why you decided maybe not to do that and how learning on the job has worked for you?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I graduated college in 2021 at the height of the COVID pandemic. And, I couldn't get a job in corporate responsibility. It's just not something people were hiring for. And so I got a job at a nonprofit and I said, I'll do 2 years here and then I'll try to transfer into corporate responsibility. And if I'm struggling, then I'll maybe get a certificate or go to grad school. But, within like 3 months of this job, I got a recruiter who reached out to me on LinkedIn for a job at Oracle to do social impact there. And so I said yes to it. And I think that's my biggest advice I always tell people is say yes to everything. It's how I've gotten most of my jobs is people just reaching out randomly for interviews. And you never know where they're going to take you. Sometimes they take you nowhere. Sometimes they take you fabulous places.
As a PS, good reminder, make sure your LinkedIn is up to date because it really is a great resource. So that's like a side note. But so you're an ESG visionary in my view. And what do you think for both your experience and sort of your generational view you bring to the table that's most valuable in your current position at Hearst?
It's interesting. So I think my generation is really focused on, the personal is political. Identity politics are important to my generation. And I think that's not something that older generations usually brought into the workplace. For many reasons, marginalized people weren't welcome into corporate environments for many reasons over the years, and that's really changed in the past few years. And so I think I bring an interesting perspective of what are the consumers that are my generation? What are they looking for in an employer? What are they looking for when they want to purchase things, when they want to read media? What are stakeholders looking for? I feel like eyes are on Gen Z as to kind of lead the way in many ways. What are they focused on? And so I can bring that perspective because that's where we're moving towards and maybe where, older generations haven't focused on that in an interesting way.
Yeah. And I would say, we're seeing a lot of that with our clients and especially with, in the product realm. I mean, it's so interesting and it really is driving where people are putting their money and their time. And the other thing I think that's really interesting about your position and where you've worked before, which is, Oracle and Nike and all these other, large companies, like I think you said Iron Mountain, et cetera. They're very diverse portfolios. Hers might be the most diverse probably.
Yes.
But I think some of our, like with all the types of businesses, and I think some of our clients have struggle in terms of setting goals and objectives across businesses. Because when you have such a diverse portfolio, that's a challenge. So you could have a paper company at the same time you have a tech company or whatever that might be. So tell me how you sort of work your way through that minefield and figure out how to bring all of the businesses under the umbrella.
Yeah, I think
ESG.
It's interesting. I think there was this kind of older vision that you always had to have brand alignment and that there was one thing that you were focused on and one thing that you were doing, which works for some brands when you have a really narrow scope. Nike, really focused on athletic wear, right? They can find easy brand alignment. Same for Iron Mountain, focused on data preservation. They can do historical preservation. That works. For a company like Hearst, there's so much under the umbrella, to your point. It's challenging to figure out where to go. You can have prongs. For us, half of our business is B2B. And so we have to gear towards a different clientele when we're talking about our ESG efforts. Sustainability tends to be more important in that conversation. But for our consumer media businesses, we have to think about our biggest thing is educating the public. That is what ties us to ESG. It's educating the public about what's going on in terms of DEI. It's educating the public in terms of what's going on in climate change. When our newspapers write about it, when it's featured in Harper's Bazaar, when it's in a newspaper, that's part of our ESG mission. And so you can find those opportunities, but it's okay for it to be, let each business kind of dictate that and have layers to that ESG portfolio. We found that works really well for us.
Yeah, because our different B2C and B2B are extremely different.
Exactly.
And I would say like one of the things, for example, B2B versus B2C is greenwashing. So, the greenwashing caseload in my world is up extensively. But it's mostly in a consumer situation where something was, represented to do something environmentally safe or protective or whatever. What have you seen around greenwashing? And again, maybe you could sort of tell us, like, it's from a generational perspective, what should companies think about to avoid greenwashing?
It's a tough line to walk. You have to be careful because you want to stay in line with what everyone else is doing. You want to stay in line with what the news is, what you think consumers want or stakeholders want, but you don't want to overpromise. And I think we've seen this backlash happen where companies are maybe overpromising and it's great for PR, and then they can't really back up these promises that have been made. And I think that is even worse. There's an argument to be made that making these promises pushes us in a positive direction. And that's absolutely true. But I think especially my generation, they will pay attention to if you haven't fulfilled those promises and what that has looked like. And so, what we found, at least at Hearst, that works really well is, kind of a say what you mean and mean what you say. And it's okay to not be super flashy about everything as long as you can back it up. And I think that's really the core of it and what consumers want, especially.
I feel like we need t-shirts. Say what you mean and mean what you say. That is literally the best legal advice you can get people. And back it up. We could put that on the back of it. So that's would be perfect. So
and in fashion line, ESG fashion line.
We'll do a collab. It'll be perfect. So what would you say is your biggest ESG success? It can either be while you're in your current job or in, one of your previous positions.
Yeah, I think the thing that excites me most is probably the Neurodiversity at Hearst program. So I joined Hearst just over a year ago, and kind of one of the first things I started working on was building out a neurodiversity hiring initiative. So hiring people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, typically people who are either screened out of the interview process because those interviews aren't necessarily inclusive in those ways, maybe even screened out of a job based on the job application, or even if they kind of make it through those doors, the manager doesn't know how to manage someone who is neurodiverse. And so we started with creating a 15-week apprenticeship program with the option to hire full-time. We trained HR, we trained managers on how to write inclusive job descriptions, how to interview, how to manage. And it's been really successful at the end of the day. It's a program, if you are trying to get involved in ESG or DEI, you can probably get up in about a year. And while the program is great, and we're thrilled we can hire more people, the more exciting part is the cultural impact. I get emails every day almost with someone saying, I'm so excited that this program is happening. It means so much to me. I'm autistic, or my kid has ADHD. And we've also seen 4 new employee resource groups pop up in the past year around disability inclusion, 2 that are neurodiverse specific. And it's also something that's good for business. It's the right thing to do, but we also know that managers who manage people who are neurodiverse become the strongest managers. We also see that there's just higher productivity when teams are neurodiverse. And so these are really good things for our business as a whole.
I love everything about that. Did you guys bring in outside advisors on that topic, or how did you build the program?
Yeah, so it was a combination. So we did have a recruiting partner. I think especially to get a program off the ground, a recruiting partner is key. I feel very strongly that this was a fantastic recruiting partner. We use a company called Integrate. They're actually a nonprofit. And then we also use another company called Beyond Impact, because you really have to do a really broad internal assessment of where there's gaps in your current system, and where there's opportunities to improve to be more neuro-inclusive.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, a lot of companies sort of focus on, planet, people, purpose under the ESG umbrella. And I feel like I've had so many discussions around planet, some around governance, but we haven't talked enough about the people or the social, which is a big part of success of businesses and of ESG programs. And inclusion right now, obviously, is definitely a hot topic. Tell me a little bit beyond the neurodivergent focus. Tell me a little bit about your role and the company's view on, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging goals, and how that is integrated within the larger ESG umbrella.
Yeah, I think disability as a whole has been a huge focus for us in the past year. 1 in 5 people in the US have a disability, and it's the largest minority group. And so it's often overlooked. But interestingly enough, it's not as politicized as other DE&I topics, and it kind of rises above the culture wars. And so it's a really interesting opportunity to be more involved when we come to DEI, but not get in those tricky waters. It encompasses a lot of things, right? You're thinking about accommodations, you're thinking about hiring, you're thinking about web accessibility. Can someone who's blind and uses a screen reader, can they access the website? If not, it's a legal liability if they can. someone has low vision or is colorblind, can they see everything? Is there enough color contrast? So those are some things we've been looking at a lot this year. But, DEI comes in many forms. A lot of it is kind of to my point earlier is, each of our divisions does a lot. They operate pretty autonomously. And so we want to allow them to also share their own story is what are they doing? Each has their own ERGs. We have to kind of think about that part as a piece of it. They're all producing their own, well, not all, but half of them are producing their own media and talking about these topics. And that kind of pushes the brand forward in different ways as well.
Yeah, I love that. And when we were prepping, one of the things we talked a little bit about was when we do prep a little bit, we connect, but it's still unscripted. We talked about the affirmative action ruling and kind of the rise in reverse discrimination cases. And I've, written on this and, we had a good chat on it. And I think that people, even though that ruling is so narrow, we don't know how far it's going to go, but people are trying to stretch it far and wide. And
Absolutely.
How have you guys reacted to that ruling? I mean, I think there's been sort of two camps, right? People who are peeling back, maybe changing terminology, but not necessarily objectives and rethinking things. And then there are people that say, I don't really care. These are a priority for me and for my business, and I'm going to go forward. I'm just wondering what your view is, maybe what you want to share a little bit what the company's doing around that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And so at Hearst, we have a few venture companies. Two are focused on minorities. We have one that's focused on women-owned companies and one that's focused on BIPOC-owned companies. And those are staying strong. We believe that the work they're doing is both compliant and important work to do. I think in terms of our DEI practices more internally, ultimately, we know that diversity is good for business. And there's so many studies that show that. It's amazing for innovation. It's amazing for productivity, retention, belonging. And so I frankly don't care if someone's doing it for the right reasons as long as we're doing it. If you want to tell them it's the business case why we're doing it, fine, as long as it gets people on board.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love all the studies and the statistics and, there's boardroom statistics and companies are more profitable. I mean, it's just because if everyone's thinking like, there's just no possible way, to really get to the best result. And then not to go all the way back to the neurodiversity focus, but I did have one question on that. Because a lot of what you talk about is, we talked about like, okay, make sure you track what you're doing, say what you mean, what you say and track it. How, are you guys tracking the neurodiversity successes in any way in terms of like the number of people that stay, or are you doing any data collection around that?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. So for our apprenticeship program, it was a pilot program we ran. We're very open about it. And our goal is to broaden that out. And so we are fresh out of that. The formal apprenticeship ended back at the end of April. So we're only 1 month out of it. So now our goal is broadening that out. I think the bigger opportunity, frankly, aside from the hiring, is the training pieces. That's stuff we want to bring to HR. We want to bring to managers more broadly. Fantastic thing is that after this program, we, surveyed all of the HR that was involved, all managers, anyone else involved, and people said that this was one of the most impactful things they've done throughout their career being part of this program. Love and that. Managers felt that they were such better managers now, which is what we want to show. They knew how to be better with their expectations and actually understand what they want out of someone. They understood how to get the most out of their team instead of them expecting the team to kind of conform to their managerial style. And that is the biggest win. And so if we can broaden that out to all managers, we don't need an official hiring program anymore. It's just part of how we do business. And that's the end goal.
Yeah, I love that. That's just like huge and successful. And should be screaming that from the rooftops. That's very, and it is, I've not had a conversation yet, and I do a ton outside of ESG with sort of professional women and, headed all these diversity committees, and neurodivergence is such an underserved population and topic and all of that. So thank you for all you're doing around that. So let's talk about one of my favorite topics, which is regulations. As a lawyer, so, we're shifting now from this voluntary framework, look how far we've gotten, to we have regulations that are either there, they might be stayed, they may be in play, it's sort of everyday changes. So not so focused on that, but let's talk about California first, because you guys have such a large presence in California. I read yesterday that Governor Newsom actually finally funded the ESG laws that he has put in place that we're waiting on CARB to enact regs for. Obviously, most of them are related to both private and public company businesses, but to GHG emissions and sort of the E piece. How are you guys getting ready for that, and what's your role in that piece?
Yeah, look, we're ready. We're tracking our emissions. We can report on them. There's fantastic platforms out there that make that process easier for us, which is great. But, even though we're a private company, and yes, California obviously applies to us, for any regulations across the board, we know that we need to stay in step with what public companies are doing. We have the same stakeholder and consumer pressure. And so we don't want to be behind in any of those. I think, I was at least hoping that for the SEC, it would include private companies, because I think that'd be important. And we hope it's going to include scope 3. But that's okay. I think private companies know they have to stay in line. And I think for California, it's good progress for us. Most of our sustainability work is out of California. We own something called Western Properties, where we own 20 million trees that are an important narrative in that. We also own solar fields. And so we want to make sure that air consumers that matters to consumers. And we want to make sure we can report on all of it and continue to report on it in great depth, because we know regulations are only going to get more and more strict.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the tree situation in California. I'm not sure exactly what to call it, but I think that's fascinating. So talk a little bit about your investment there and how that's going.
It goes back to some history. So if anyone's familiar with the Hearst Castle, the Hearst Castle was owned by Senator George Hearst, and who started Hearst. And eventually the castle was given to the state, but all the surrounding land is still owned by Hearst. And so that's where we own forests. We actually just acquired a new forest, and we own ranches, we own a winery, and we own solar fields. And so all really important towards our sustainability journey that frankly we inherited, which is very unique. It wasn't a business that I thought we would get into, but very important for our broader sustainability journey. We also own the San Francisco Chronicle. And so we know for San Francisco tends to be a more liberal audience. Sustainability is an important piece to there. And so, Western Properties, which is our forests and ranches and all of that, ends up being, more and more by the year, a more prevalent part of the Hearst portfolio.
Yeah. And you can read about some of that stuff in the sustainability report. So I think you guys have done your second.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that is important to talk about is, everyone's always wants to, especially private companies who may not be quite as advanced as public companies. How do I do this without boiling the ocean? And I think, say what you mean what you say is part of what you have to think about for that. And you guys have done a little bit of a slower roll, but yet had a lot of impact. Can you talk about how you have that strategy and how you're making it work?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to follow what our businesses are doing, which frankly is different across the board because they're all appealing to different markets. And so, we are pretty open that we haven't been talking about our sustainability journey for that long. And so we're excited to talk about Western Properties. We're excited to talk about what our newspapers are doing. We're excited to talk about what Fitch, which is one of the many companies we own, what they're doing. They made a net zero commitment by 2040. That's an important thing for us to chat about too. And so I think for us, it's really about aggregating what are all of our businesses doing and how do we tell that narrative, to your point earlier, how do we tell that kind of single thread, really allowing everyone to kind of have their own moment to talk about all the work they're doing around sustainability. There's a few of our companies that really have sustainability woven into their business model, and I think that's exciting to see. My hope is that more and more companies start to do that because they need to do it and because it makes sense for business at the end of the day. Heidi, I'm sure you know, and tell many of your clients this is just good business.
100%. And a lot of my presentations, I have slides that actually say businesses that embrace ESG do better in terms of revenue, all of it. And the reason it happens, I think, is aligned with what you're saying, Isabel, honestly, is that it's not that ESG itself is going to do anything, but it's because you're identifying opportunities and you're setting goals and you're doing things that are good for the stakeholders. And therefore, that's going to just propel you forward. So it's kind of the strategic forward thinking that I think is so critical. And we love saying, my first question to a client that wants me to help with their ESG program is, okay, what are your business values and how are you going to align those two together? We're not going to take everything under this, all the UN goals, right? Like I've lost track of how many there are, but there's a lot. You can't do it all. So let's talk. I do want to actually follow up before I asked you about AI. I was about to ask you about AI, but you said you wished that the SEC had included Scope 3. Is that with your business hat on, or is that with your Gen Z you guys are doing? Or tell me a little more about that comment.
Yeah, it's with both hats on. I think they're hard to differentiate sometimes. But I think, we can't just talk about Scope 1 and Scope 2 without focusing on Scope 3. And I think it's a miss to not focus on it. And I think there are a variety of companies that are doing great work around disclosure around these topics without regulations, but there needs to be a push for other companies who maybe are laggards in this area to say it's a priority. I think it matters to my generation, but I think it matters to businesses as well. I think there's often sometimes a need to put sustainability on the individual, whereas corporations are the largest emitters. So we need to focus on all these different pieces together to tell one narrative.
Yeah, and most companies, Scope 3 is 80 to 90% of their emissions. So are you seeing requests from your business clients or customers to give information about your emissions?
Not for Scope 3. It's Scope 1 and Scope 2, absolutely. And, we include that in our public report. We can get more granular with it, depending on who's asking for it. But we haven't seen the push for Scope 3 yet.
I think we're going to get there as soon as we can sort of figure out how to better capture it. I think people are just so overwhelmed once they understand Scope 1 and 2, maybe, I think we're going to get there. So let's talk about AI, because AI is, I know, a big part of your business, and it's an interesting piece of the ESG portfolio. It certainly takes a lot of energy, actually. Wondering what your thoughts about the integration of AI with ESG, and if you guys are doing anything around that.
There's interesting opportunities. I mean, more broadly speaking, if you talk about sustainability, you could talk about a digital twin, and AI really revolutionizes that. Huge way to have an environmental impact is by using digital twins. When we talk about more DE&I, and more specifically disability inclusion, AI and Gen AI is a massive win for the disability community. If you look at, there's a variety of auditing tools out there to check if your websites are accessible. Now that we're using AI, you can actually get almost 40% more errors that you can catch with these tools versus these older tools that weren't utilizing AI. And so that really mitigates the amount of manual testing that you need to do on a website. You could also be able to create alt text for an image now with AI, whereas that was a manual thing before. So you're making your websites more accessible more easily. And I think that's a huge win for everyone involved, both the people who are your consumers or your stakeholders, and for the business itself. And ultimately, you're reducing risk by allowing AI to help you with your web accessibility.
Yeah, and increasing your stride towards those goals since it's a tool. So, okay, so when you're not recreating all these programs and doing these amazing, the amazing work and bringing this really young, fresh perspective, Isabel, what do you do in your free time? Everyone, I love asking everyone that, because we're not just women around ESG. We have a personal life too. So I'd love to hear what you do in your free time.
Well, I live in New York City, which is an endless place to explore. So there's always fun things to do. My favorite thing to do, though, is probably cook. I love cooking. And I spend so much time cooking for friends and family. And I think there's nothing better than bringing people together through food. And it's also meditative after a stressful day. But that's what I spend my time doing.
I love it. No wonder you and my oldest get along so well. I hate cooking. It's just for you. So I cannot thank you enough. I have learned a lot from you today. I think that all of us need to expand our definition of inclusion and think about say what you mean what you say. We are gonna think about those shirts. And I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today and being part of our ESG Guru series, because you are definitely a guru, Isabel. So thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Abby.
Bye-bye.